Ma'am, that area is currently restricted. I must insist that you move away from the entrance. The tone was high and slightly unstable, characteristic of a very young man, yet delivered with the rigid conviction only a brand new uniform and the smallest degree of delegated authority can bestow. Sophia Brown paused, her fingers stopping mere inches from the glass doors of the Marine Corps exchange. She slowly pivoted, her expression composed and level. Facing her was a Lance Corporal, visibly inflating his chest. His M4 rifle was carried with a deliberate, albeit casual, readiness. His digital camouflage utilities were immaculate, the fabric still rigid from the laundry. He appeared to be barely out of high school. "I merely intend to enter the building," Sophia stated, her voice calm and entirely free of annoyance. She presented her Department of Defense identification, clearly marked with her retired veteran status. "I am authorized access." The young Marine, later known as Miller, scrutinized the card, his gaze oscillating between her photograph and her face. Sophia immediately recognized the expression, an awkward blend of trained suspicion and rigid adherence to protocol, a combination he had not yet mastered. She was a woman in casual attire, comfortable jeans, a gray t-shirt, and a distinctive red leather jacket, who did not conform to his mental picture of an authorized patron. "This is a veteran's ID," he informed her, speaking as if she were oblivious. "That grants you base access and permission for the main exchange. It does not, however, authorize entry into the uniform section during restocking hours, which is strictly for active duty personnel right now." "I understand," Sophia replied. Yet the prominent sign on the door clearly indicates the building is open. The Lance Corporal's jaw visibly clenched. He sensed the interaction slipping out of his command and reacted poorly. "The sign is incorrect. I am informing you of the standing policy. Ma'am, please withdraw." He dismissed her with a slight movement of his chin towards the main passage. A few individuals, Marines in uniform and families carrying shopping, began slowing their movement, their interest piqued by the subtle standoff. Sophia remained perfectly still, a picture of undisturbed serenity. She had played this role many times before. It was a routine of mistaken assumptions leading to inevitable corrections. Her profound tranquility and modest stance were routinely misread as signs of pliability or disorientation. While this misunderstanding was seldom repeated, the initial occurrence was invariably exasperating. The junior Marine, Miller, interpreted her persistent silence as outright insubordination. "Did you not comprehend my instruction, ma'am?" His voice sharpened audibly, attracting increased scrutiny from the burgeoning crowd. "You are required to vacate this area." Observing the stalemate from nearby, his colleague, a marginally more senior Marine named Corporal Davis, strolled over. "What seems to be the issue, Miller?" "This woman believes a spouse's identification grants her access to off-limits zones," Miller announced, raising his voice sufficiently for the collecting spectators to overhear. "I've informed her that entry is restricted solely to active duty personnel." He had completely failed to acknowledge the retired designation clearly visible on her card, his judgmental focus seemingly overriding proper procedure upon encountering a woman in civilian clothes challenging his command. Sophia shifted her attention toward Davis, but offered no verbal comment, allowing Miller's hasty, prejudiced accusation to stand unchallenged. That specific insult was typical, a quick, effortless way to dismiss her. It was fundamentally simpler for them to categorize her as merely an adjunct to military service, a dependent rather than acknowledging her as a primary service member herself. Davis at least performed the professional courtesy of taking the identification card from Miller's grip to examine it properly. He noted the name. Brown. Sophia M. Then his eyes fell upon the rank detailed beneath her picture. Sergeant Major. His pupils dilated only slightly, but immediately, deeply ingrained disbelief took hold. A sergeant major? This composed woman, casually clad in jeans and a leather jacket, simply did not align with his mental model. Sergeant majors, in his limited experience, were legendary, often older, battle-hardened individuals, figures whose presence resonated with the weight of institutional history. Furthermore, they were overwhelmingly male. He could not reconcile the image of a female sergeant major with the physique and appearance of a woman who might be featured on a fitness publication cover. "This identification is not necessarily unusual, ma'am," Davis stated, his voice now betraying a greater degree of wariness than Miller's previous arrogance. He was attempting a more measured, tactical approach to check the situation without losing face. "We frequently encounter sophisticated forged IDs. Would you object if we electronically verify its authenticity?" "You are welcome to verify it," Sophia responded, her hands now relaxing into the pockets of her jacket. This casual position allowed her fingers to make contact with the cold, star-shaped metal object concealed within a special seam, a silent, physical tether to a life and world far removed from this moment. Miller reacted with a dismissive sound, grabbing the card back. "Fine, we'll verify it. And you are to remain right here. Do not move." He then marched towards a small security hut 20 feet away, which housed a computer terminal and scanner. Davis remained near Sophia, shifting his stance repeatedly, visibly unnerved by the increasing public visibility of the confrontation. The onlookers were multiplying. A gunnery sergeant, identifiable by the numerous hash marks covering his sleeve, halted, observing the unfolding scene with folded arms. Nearby, two newly commissioned lieutenants feigned interest in their phones near the food court entrance. The incident was quickly escalating into a public spectacle. Attempting to diffuse the growing tension, Davis initiated conversation. "So, you served in the Corps?" he inquired, his tone suggesting a casual, distant past event. "I did," Sophia confirmed. "What was your MOS?" he pressed, using the standard query designed to trap potential impersonators. 0369, she replied instantly. "Infantry unit leader." Davis registered the response. An infantry military occupational specialty. He assessed her appearance again. Slight build, yet possessing a visible, taut strength in her arms and the confident posture of her shoulders. The notion of a female infantry sergeant major remained jarring. Given the recent integration of women into infantry roles, the timeline felt improbable to his unexamined prejudice, solidifying his disbelief. "Right," he uttered, the single word saturated with skepticism. Miller reappeared from the guard post, wearing a look of triumphant vindication. "Well, what do you know? The system confirms the ID is valid, states you retired last year." He struck the card against his palm. "But you know, systems are vulnerable to hacking. Documents can be fabricated. An infantry sergeant major? That is a mighty improbable story, ma'am." He was clearly savoring his role as the protector, defending the Corps' integrity against what he was convinced was deception. His language and actions were deliberately provocative, played entirely for the benefit of the surrounding crowd. "Let me pose a question to you," Miller continued, moving closer and dropping his voice to a low, menacing whisper. "Are you aware that the fraudulent display of rank and insignia, impersonating a sergeant major, is a serious federal crime? The authentic ones do not tolerate it. We can have PMO, Provost Marshal's office, here in 5 minutes." This was an explicit threat, an accusation of criminal activity. Sophia's outward composure held firm, yet a subtle change registered deep within her eyes, a look of profound, aching exhaustion. She had endured deadly ambushes in the Sangan Valley, survived improvised explosive devices, IEDs, along Fallujah's routes, and navigated the brutal politics of the senior enlisted hierarchy. Now, under the benign sunlight of a quiet Tuesday on a domestic military installation, she was being accosted by a Marine who reeked of adolescent arrogance and inexpensive energy drinks. Miller's attention was drawn back to her jacket, the intensely vibrant red contrasting sharply with the ubiquitous green and tan military attire surrounding them. He instinctively extended his hand, his finger nearly grazing the leather before he pulled back. "Sharp jacket," he commented, his voice laced with clear derision. "Very tactical." That near touch and the sneering tone acted as a sudden trigger. It didn't spark resentment, but rather a vivid recollection of an entirely different period and setting. It was a momentary flash echo, the heavy, suffocating air inside a hangar, not stateside, but in Afghanistan. The surprising, unfamiliar weight of her dress blues draped over her after a year spent in combat utilities. The measured, respectful applause of high-ranking officers, including a 4-star general whose chest was a tapestry of commendations, stepping forward. The cool, heavy sensation of a blue silken ribbon being placed around her neck. The 5-pointed star and the gold eagle resting just below her collarbone. She recalled the ensuing silence, which felt deeper and more absolute than the aftermath of any explosion. She then remembered her squad, the survivors, collectively contributing funds to purchase the red leather jacket shortly thereafter. "This way we'll never lose you in a crowd, Gunny," her platoon sergeant had whispered, his voice thick with unspent emotion. They had ignored her recently acquired rank. To them, she remained their own. The jacket was not an article of clothing. It was a testament of remembrance. It was armor. Back in the present, the sun beat down warm on her face. The intrusive memory vanished. Miller's stream of words continued, a meaningless droning sound to Sophia. But across the main thoroughfare, the observing gunnery sergeant, Reyes, finally pushed away from the wall he was leaning against. Reyes was a career man, his face etched with the complexities of numerous deployments. He hadn't paid close attention until Miller announced the name to his partner during the initial ID verification. "Running a check on a Sophia M. Brown," Miller had mentioned, just loud enough to reach the quiet gunnery sergeant. That specific name immediately arrested Reyes's movement. Brown. Sergeant Major Sophia Brown. It seemed impossible. Not that Sophia Brown, the legendary hero of Firebase Kilo, the very figure used to humble fresh lieutenants. Reyes had personally been a staff sergeant at the Regional Command Center when the paperwork for her Medal of Honor was processed. He recalled reading the full citation, feeling a visceral chill from the dry, official description of an almost unimaginable act of valor. Watching Miller issue threats, seeing the overwhelming contempt and the profound catastrophic ignorance of the 2 junior Marines, Reyes was seized by a terrible mix of dread and intense indignation. This was beyond mere disrespect. It felt like a sacrilege. Reyes did not move to intervene directly or shout, as that would only escalate the spectacle and further embarrass a woman who had already endured the measure of 10 Marines. Instead, he retreated into the deep shadow of an adjacent alcove, produced his cell phone, and activated a speed dial number. His thumb vibrated slightly, not from fear, but from a fierce surge of adrenaline and profound respect. The call was answered on the second ring. "Sergeant Major's office." "This is Gunnery Sergeant Reyes," he stated, his voice hushed and urgent. "I require immediate communication with the base Sergeant Major. This is a code red emergency." A moment of silence passed. "Gunny, the Sergeant Major is currently in conference with the commanding officer." "I don't care if he's in conference with the Commandant himself. Reyes interjected, his voice raw as abrasive stone. "You inform him that Lance Corporal Miller and Corporal Davis are actively harassing Sergeant Major Sophia Brown outside the main exchange. Tell him I said her name. He will understand the gravity." He ended the call abruptly. Reinforcements were mobilized. The two young Marines, fully invested in their self-created drama of authority, had no conception of the devastating consequence rapidly approaching. Within the pristine, silent confines of the base headquarters, a domain characterized by glossy floors and framed images of past leadership, Sergeant Major Evans received the desperate, hushed communication from his junior aide. Evans was an imposing figure, a man seemingly sculpted from pure discipline and granite, rarely betraying any emotion. Yet, as the aide finished relating Gunnery Sergeant Reyes's alarming message, the Sergeant Major's face first drained of color in shock, then instantly solidified into a grim mask of cold fury. "Repeat that name," he commanded, his voice a profound, barely audible tremor. "Sophia M. Brown, Sergeant Major." Evans rose so violently that his chair screeched across the polished floor. The base's commanding officer, the colonel, who had been discussing budget figures, broke off mid-sentence, startled. "Sir," Evans stated, his voice rigidly controlled, struggling to contain an inner storm of rage. "An extremely serious incident is underway at the main exchange. We must leave immediately." "What exactly is happening, Sergeant Major?" the colonel demanded, standing up. "Retrieve the service record for Sergeant Major Sophia M. Brown, retired," Evans ordered his aide, who was already keying in the data at a frantic pace. The file instantly appeared on a massive wall monitor. The colonel's eyes rapidly absorbed the information. A duty history that mirrored the timeline of the global conflict. A spectacular list of commendations. The Purple Heart, with 2 stars, the Bronze Star with V, the Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal, and then, dominating the record, the singular most hallowed distinction, the Medal of Honor. The colonel gasped, his breath catching in his throat. He read the terse citation summary. Firebase Kilo, Sangan District, single-handedly held off a complex ambush, defended a casualty collection point for 3 hours. Pale-faced, he turned to Sergeant Major Evans. Are we talking about the one known as the Ghost of Sangan?" "She is, sir," Evans confirmed, seizing his cover from its perch. "And 2 of our most junior Marines are treating her as an unauthorized intruder." The colonel required no further instruction. "Mobilize the vehicles. Move out." Back outside the exchange, Miller had reached the apex of his increasingly hostile behavior. Unable to secure validation for his fraudulent ID theory, he pivoted to a new tactic: bureaucratic intimidation. "Look, ma'am, I don't care who you claim to be. You have created a spectacle," he announced, aggressively puffing out his chest. "You are engaging in disruptive conduct. I am now ordering you to vacate the installation. Your base privileges are hereby suspended pending official investigation." He finished with, "Relinquish the ID card." This pronouncement marked his final, catastrophic overreach. As a Lance Corporal, he possessed zero authority to revoke anyone's base access, particularly that of a retired Sergeant Major. He was blatantly inventing policy, intoxicated by the attention of the gathering onlookers. Sophia finally withdrew her hands from her jacket pockets. She looked directly at him, and for the first time, an emotion other than simple patience registered on her face. A deep, sorrowful pity. "Marine," she said, her voice quiet but imbued with immense gravity. "You must cease speaking immediately." But Miller was beyond caution. "Hand over the identification, or I will contact PMO. and have you forcibly removed in restraints for public disturbance and failure to comply with a lawful command." At that precise instant, the faint sound of accelerating engines cut through the air. Two black, official-looking sedans and a matte green military Humvee swept into the parking area, stopping with practiced precision just yards from the confrontation. The stunned crowd parted instantly. Doors opened synchronously. Out stepped the base commanding officer, a full colonel whose bearing of command seemed to subtly distort the space around him. Alongside him stepped the base sergeant major, his face a thunderous scowl. They were closely followed by a small command group. Moving as a single, intimidating entity, their heels struck the pavement in a sharp, resonant rhythm. The entire scene froze. Miller and Davis snapped their heads around towards the arrivals, their jaws dropping and the blood draining from their faces. They became statues of sheer terror. The colonel and the sergeant major paid them no mind whatsoever. Their focus was absolute, fixed entirely on Sophia. They walked straight to her, stopping 3 feet away. Then, in a singular, synchronized movement so sharp it seemed to echo, the colonel and the sergeant major snapped to attention and delivered the most profound, respectful salute Sophia had witnessed in years. Their right hands cut sharply to the brim of their covers, their bodies rigid, their expressions locked on her with pure, unadulterated reverence. A collective gasp swept through the entire assembly. "Sergeant Major Brown!" The base sergeant major's voice resonated, loud and clear, across the abruptly silent concourse. "Ma'am, we are deeply honored by your presence on our installation." The colonel terminated his salute. "Ma'am," he continued, his tone conveying profound, genuine humility. "On behalf of every service member here, I offer a sincere apology for the utterly unacceptable reception you have received today." He then pivoted, his gaze seeking out Miller and Davis, who stood petrified, visibly nauseous. The colonel's look was not one of heat, but of absolute freezing cold, the kind of look that irrevocably terminates careers. He chose not to address them immediately. Instead, he turned back to the assembled crowd, raising his voice to ensure all present could hear. "Most of you were school children when the events at Firebase Kilo transpired," he began. "But the history of the Corps is paramount, and you must know its legends." He nodded to the sergeant major, who produced a small, laminated card from his dress uniform pocket. Clearing his throat, the sergeant major commenced reading. "The President of the United States of America, by Act of Congress, March 3, 1863, has awarded the Medal of Honor to Gunnery Sergeant Sophia M. Brown, United States Marine Corps, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty." The formalized words landed like sledgehammers upon the stunned silence. While serving as a platoon sergeant in the Sangin district, Afghanistan, Gunnery Sergeant Brown's patrol was subjected to a crushing ambush by a numerically superior enemy. With her platoon commander and platoon sergeant incapacitated in the initial assault, she instantly assumed command, exposing herself repeatedly to withering machine gun and rocket-propelled grenade fire. She moved tirelessly between defensive positions, reorganizing the remaining elements and directing their return fire. When the casualty collection point came under direct attack, she single-handedly positioned her body as a shield between the incoming rounds and 3 wounded Marines, sustaining multiple shrapnel injuries while simultaneously firing and providing medical aid. For 3 consecutive hours, she repelled relentless waves of enemy attack. Her singular actions were directly responsible for saving the lives of 7 Marines and preventing the entire platoon from being overrun. As the sergeant major spoke, Marines throughout the audience, from the newest private to the oldest master gunnery sergeant, began instinctively snapping to attention. Hands previously in pockets or holding devices fell rigid to their sides. Expressions of casual curiosity were replaced by profound awe and immense respect. Older veterans present, bearing their own scars and faded tattoos, quietly rendered salutes of recognition. When the reading concluded, a silence more sacred than any before descended. The sergeant major refolded the card. The colonel then focused his full, undivided attention onto the two paralyzed junior Marines. His voice dropped to a level of chilling lethality. "You two will report to my office in 1 hour. You will be in your Service A uniform. You will bring your corporal of the guard and your platoon sergeant. You will bring your company first sergeant and your company commander. And you will be prepared to explain to me why you believed it was your duty to publicly humiliate a recipient of our nation's highest award for valor." He paused, letting the weight of his words crush them. "You failed to follow procedure. You failed to show respect. But worst of all, you failed to see the Marine standing in front of you. You saw a woman in a jacket. You saw what you expected to see. You are a disgrace to that uniform." He turned back to Sophia, his expression softening instantly. "Ma'am, whatever you need." Sophia held up a hand. "Sir," she said, her voice finally breaking its quiet containment, not with anger, but with the firm authority of a born leader. She looked directly at Miller and Davis. "The standards are not the problem," she said, her words a lesson for everyone listening. "The standards keep us alive. The problem is prejudice. You didn't fail because the rules are too hard. You failed because you applied them unfairly. You looked at me and made an assumption. A real leader, a real Marine, verifies. They don't assume. They look at the ID card. They look at the person, and they treat them with the dignity that is the bedrock of our core. Don't soften the standards. Just learn to apply them to everyone, regardless of what they look like." As she spoke, another flash echo, this one sharp and violent, ripped through her mind. The smell of cordite and iron, the scream of a wounded Marine, a boy no older than Miller, his leg a mangled ruin. The crack of enemy rounds striking the dirt just inches from her head as she knelt over him, her hands slick with his blood, her own body shielding his. She was shouting, "Stay with me, Marine! Stay with me!" She remembered the look in his eyes, the terror being replaced by a flicker of hope because she was there, because she had not abandoned him. The medal wasn't for the fighting. It was for the love, the fierce, protective love for the Marines to her left and her right. The moment ended. She was back in the sun outside the exchange. She had offered her lesson. Her duty, it seemed, was never truly done. In the weeks that followed, the incident at the exchange became a cautionary tale whispered across the base. Lance Corporal Miller and Corporal Davis were formally disciplined. An official reprimand entered into their records that would follow them for the rest of their careers. But the punishment was secondary to the lesson. The base commander mandated a base-wide training refresh on professional conduct, ID verification procedures, and the specific history of women in combat arms. Photos of trailblazing women, including a formal smiling portrait of Sergeant Major Sophia Brown, began appearing on the walls of unit headquarters. About a month later, Sophia was at the base gym working through a set of pull-ups in a quiet corner. A shadow fell over her. She finished her set, dropped to the floor, and turned. It was Miller. He was in workout gear, looking smaller and younger without his uniform and bravado. He twisted a towel in his hands, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Ma'am," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Sergeant Major Brown?" Sophia waited, taking a sip from her water bottle. I just wanted to apologize," he stammered, finally looking up. His eyes were filled with a genuine, painful shame. There's no excuse for how I acted, for what I said. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. I'm sorry. I disrespected you, and I disrespected the uniform I wear. Sophia studied him for a long moment. She saw the man he could be, not the Marine he had pretended to be. I accept your apology, Lance Corporal, she said simply. There was no condescension in her voice, only quiet finality. She turned to go back to her workout, but then she stopped. Miller, she said, and he looked up, surprised she had used his name. Your job out there is to be a guardian. A good guardian doesn't just look for threats. They look for heroes. They're a lot harder to spot. Remember that. He nodded, unable to speak. The weight of her grace was more profound than any punishment. He watched as she turned back to the pull-up bar, her movements fluid and strong. He was just a Marine at the beginning of his journey, and he had just been mentored by a living legend he had been too blind to see. It was a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his life. If this story of valor and respect moved you, please like this video, subscribe to She Chose Fortitude, and share it to honor all our nation's heroes. We'll see you in the next one.